After wearing and testing these for several days now in various ways, today I'm reviewing the new Huda Beauty Easy Blur foundation and primer. Is this foundation, in fact, everything you ever wanted from a foundation and more? And do you actually need the matching primer? And do you need to use as much of it as they say you do? And is a brush necessary to get a flawless application? Those are just some of the questions we're going to talk about today. Easy Blur is supposed to blur your complexion and your pores and filter your face so it looks airbrushed. It's also supposed to feel comfortable and lightweight and be quick and easy to apply and blend out. And it's infused with some nice skincare ingredients. I've done hundreds of foundation reviews on this channel. I don't do first impressions. I always wear test foundations for several days and give you my honest thoughts on how they work or don't work for me and what skin types I think would benefit from each foundation I test. I use different application methods, no primer, various types of primers, and show you clips throughout that I think give you a solid picture of my experience with the foundations I test, and that's what you're getting here today. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you're new, and let's get started with this new Easy Blur foundation and primer review. I found it interesting straight away that the foundation is silicone based, but the primer isn't. It's silicone free. I just felt like that was a little bit unusual. Both are 1 ounce and the primer is $29 and the foundation is $37. Now, the first day I tried this, I wanted to see how it performed with nothing underneath because not everybody wants to buy a matching primer. I squeezed out what I would consider to be around a pump of foundation if it was in a pump bottle. It has a very runny texture. There are 30 shades. I ordered shade 220 in custard, which is described as light with neutral undertones. If you think you're my shade match twin, I do keep running shade match lists over on my blog for all of the foundations and concealers that I wear, try, and test out and review. And it's always linked down in my description box where I will have all the products that I'm sharing in this video and what I'm wearing too. I have some things linked through the YouTube shopping bag icon, but they don't always have everything. So if you're curious about other things, they will be in my description box. The instructions say to use the Huda Beauty base brush for application, but I don't think you should have to buy a brush if you have another foundation tool or brush that you enjoy using. So for these first clips, when I'm using a brush, I'm using this one from It Cosmetics. It's also listed and linked for you. I started conservatively applying a small amount in a thin layer to one section at a time, and I could tell very, very quickly that this is the type of foundation that sort of adheres to your skin as you're applying it. A lot of long wearing foundations have that property, but it doesn't adhere and set down so quickly that you can't work with it and blend sections into one another. It doesn't dry down fully to that extent, but because it does have that property to it, I find applying it in thin layers in sections and blending those into one another for me is a great way to apply this foundation. I have a couple of videos on that technique that works really well for helping full coverage foundations look really natural and helping quick setting foundations apply a little bit easier. I'll have those videos linked up in the corner and down below for you. One of them has Estee Lauder Double Wear in the title, but it shows that technique. I layered where I wanted any extra coverage with the small end of the brush. I'm 49 years old. I live in the extreme heat and humidity of New Orleans, which is why I'm so hard on foundations because it's really hard to keep them from melting off your face here. And I have combination skin that can be normal or dry around the perimeter, but I get shine and oil breakthrough in the center of my face, so it can be a challenge. This foundation blends out quickly and easily, even though it does have that skin adherence property to it. And I would say the coverage this foundation gives is medium to medium full. I still had quite a bit of foundation left on the back of my hand, so I'd say a little goes a long way here. And I wanted to see if my face would explode or something if I dared to use a sponge instead of a brush like the instructions say. So on the other side of my face, I applied with a damp sponge. This foundation, by the way, is cruelty-free, vegan, alcohol-free, and there's no added fragrance, but I do notice a very, very faint scent to it as I'm applying it that dissipates after. I don't notice it after, and it is probably from just the ingredients that are in the product. Now, I'd say I got slightly less coverage on the damp sponge side than I did with the brush side, but not much less. I was expecting it to be a lot more sheared out than it was. Now here it is before setting after I put concealer just under my eyes where there was no foundation. The finish looks natural, but a little more radiant than I was expecting. And my pores and texture look nice and smooth, and it feels lightweight. Now that smooth airbrushed finish is most likely due to the two key ingredients that they're focusing on the most, silica and 1.5% niacinamide. Both of those ingredients are known to smooth texture, smooth pores, and just help give a more airbrushed, blurred appearance. Now this felt like it could be pretty self-setting for those of you who don't like to set your makeup with powder or setting spray, even though it has a more radiant finish to it, a natural radiant finish to it, and it didn't feel completely dried down. When I would touch it, it didn't go anywhere. It was really locked onto my skin. Now the Huda Beauty powder is one of my favorites in my rotation. I use this regularly. So I applied this the way I normally do, so it really fuses with my skin and foundation and looks natural and doesn't just sit on top. I pat it all over either with my damp sponge or puff, whatever I'm using, so it's sort of sitting on top of my skin. It looks like a lot at first, and then I press it in so it becomes one with my skin and my makeup. And this is what we have before the rest of my makeup is applied. And after my makeup is complete, I think it has a nice soft matte blurred natural finish. I was really happy with it at this point, and an hour and a half later it still looks good. You'd be surprised. I know it's only an hour and a half, but some foundations start getting really shiny by this point with my skin type and my heat and humidity, which is what started to happen here at around 3 hours. It was storming this day, so my lighting isn't ideal, but I think you can still see what's going on. My makeup looks good, but some shine is starting to come through as my natural oils are meshing with the foundation. Now, if you have normal or dry skin, this might be the point when you start to really love this foundation. But for me, it just means more shine than I'm comfortable with. It's just more than I personally care for, although I still have decent coverage. It's still on my face. Nothing is breaking up or looking patchy. And at around the 7-hour mark, I'm in my closet under the bright lights to show you the shine that's more than I personally care for, but the makeup itself still looks good. It's still on my face. So that part I was happy with, especially for not having used a primer. Huda recommends applying 2 finger lengths of this primer before applying the Easy Blur foundation, which completely shocked me. If you have followed me, watched my videos, been subscribed to me, tell me in the comments what's the amount of primer I always say is sufficient for your entire face. Every time I talk about primer, I say this amount is all you need, because using more than that could actually have the opposite effect and cause your foundation to slide off your face because of that heavy layer underneath. And here we are applying the same amount of primer as we applied sunscreen that morning. It just seems like a lot. So that answer was I always apply a pea-size amount of primer when I apply primer at all. So I did test this out with a normal amount of primer. We'll talk about that in a minute. And on this day, because I have such a small face, I used 1.5 finger lengths. It has kind of a wet, jelly-like silicone slippy feel to it, and it took a while to massage in that amount of primer fully into my skin. I was sitting there massaging it in for a while so that it wouldn't feel thick, like it was sitting on top of my skin. Now, this primer is supposed to control oil, blur pores and texture, and feel lightweight. It did end up settling into my skin, and after I let it sit for a couple of minutes, I applied one side with a brush in the same manner I did the day before. And on this day, I noticed it seemed to sort of grip to the primer. And while it still didn't take long to blend out and apply, it took a little bit longer than the day before. And there were a few areas on my face, I guess because of the grip factor, that I felt needed further smoothing or pressing into my skin with a sponge. Sometimes that happens with brushes. They can need streaks that needs smoothing out with a sponge. So to help with this, I just used my dry sponge that was on my vanity. It only took a few seconds. I applied the second side with a dry sponge on this day instead of damp to see if I ended up with noticeably more coverage from a dry sponge that wasn't damp and expanded so that it would soak up more of the foundation. I didn't notice that much difference in terms of coverage. We're still having some natural lighting issues from all the rain we were having when I was testing this out, but I think you can still see after applying concealer under my eyes before setting, it looks a little less radiant than yesterday and still very smooth, maybe a little bit smoother. I moved to a different window to try and get a better light for you, and I think it looks really nice on this day too. A couple of hours later when the sun came out, I ran some errands and you can see it here in pretty much full daylight. And here's that shine. It still came through on this day, although it was delayed. We're looking at around 4.5 hours versus 3 without the primer, and that shine is emphasizing my pores, especially around this area, as luminosity and radiance can do. They can reflect and draw attention to those areas. If your skin is young and smooth and taut though, as you can see, I'm kind of pulling it to show you, it looks good. And I didn't find that my skin or what the foundation looked like at the end of the day, I had a longer day on this day, looked vastly different than it did without the primer. After the initial 2 days of testing and getting a grasp of what I was dealing with, I wanted to start playing around with different mattifying types of primers and using less of the Easy Blur primer. Not so much for longevity, because I felt like they both looked pretty good in terms of coverage at the end of the day, but more so for the shine factor. I just wanted to see what these primers could do using a normal amount, if anything. I have 2 on my face right now that I used during this process, and I'm going to show you clips from the day when I used L'Oreal Prime Lab 24-hour matte setter on the right side of your screen and Milk Makeup Pore Eclipse mattifying primer on the left side of your screen. So each day I applied these primers like I normally do. I used around a pea-size amount total, split between the 2 primers on each half of my face, and let them set for a couple of minutes before applying foundation. On the day I'm showing you, I am applying foundation with my BK Beauty 106 brush in the same manner I did on the days you already saw. So I'm probably going to speed through this pretty quickly. Ignore my dry, flaky, peeling under eyes in these clips. I was having some kind of reaction that has nothing to do with foundation or primers because I don't apply them under my eyes. Basically, with every primer I used, including the regular amount of Easy Blur, the foundation had that gripability to it when I was blending it out. And after my foundation was applied, my skin looked nice and smooth and perfected, filtered, if you will, and surprisingly radiant for using mattifying primers. I tried to capture this on camera, but specifically with the L'Oreal primer, which is the runniest of the bunch. It was really the only primer I had any issues with, but the foundation sort of stuck to certain spots and didn't blend out nicely next to the inner part of my brow and my nose underneath my under eye area. I have no idea why that happened, what caused it, but after my makeup was finished, it fixed itself. It looks much better. Actually, I think this might be my favorite on-camera makeup day. I still get shine with mattifying primers, but less shine than usual. Usually happens around the 6-hour mark, and more so later in the day around 9 or 10 hours. It's just inevitable, I guess. Now, the 2 primers I have on today are Hourglass Vanish and Veil, 2 primers I use regularly. I use all of these primers regularly. I'll have them listed down below along with powders I set with if you're interested in that. But I wanted to wear primers that I normally wear here on camera so that you could just see what was happening. I think you can see some natural glow coming through, which can be more apparent on camera because the lights in front of me that eliminate shadows reflect things. But I've had to blot about 3 times while I've been filming, which has been a little over an hour now because that shine just keeps being reflected. It doesn't feel sticky or anything like that though. What are my final thoughts? How do I feel about this new foundation and primer, and what skin types do I think would benefit from these? So let's start with the questions from the beginning. Is a brush necessary to achieve a flawless finish? In my opinion, no. I thought it looked great when I applied it with a sponge and a brush. So if you want to use a brush, use a brush. If you want to use a sponge, use a sponge. If you want to buy the matching brush, that's okay too. It is a foundation that looked great no matter what I applied it with. Now, is the primer necessary, and do you need to use that much of it. There's something to be said for compatibility between matching products. These products were clearly created to go with one another. Even though the foundation is silicone based and the primer is silicone free, they work really well together. However, I personally didn't have any longevity issues with this foundation used alone or used in combination with various other primers or used with a much smaller amount of this primer. Using the 2 fingers lengths of that primer did keep my shine away longer than wearing the foundation alone, but so did using pea-size amounts of regular mattifying primers that I already love. So if you have a smoothing mattifying primer that you already own and you're curious about this foundation, I would try it out with it first, unless you're just dying to spend the extra $29. And I definitely don't think you need to use 2 fingers lengths to have a good result. I just didn't see that much difference at the end of the day using that much primer, which is just going to make you run out of product faster. Now, if you're someone who enjoys a very natural, undetectable skin-like foundation, I do not get that from this. This looks very smoothing and pretty and perfected, and it looks like makeup. It looks like I'm wearing makeup, which isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes you do want that polished, airbrushed, filtered look, and that is what this gives you, even when applied in thin layers. That was my experience, at least. And since this settles into a more radiant finish, I get shine with it as my oils start to mesh with the foundation. If you have normal to dry skin, this might be a nice foundation for you. If you're looking for a medium to full coverage, long-lasting, blurring foundation, because that might be the point. It starts to really look good on your skin and give a more natural finish for you as opposed to shiny for me. If you have a combination or oily skin or live in a very humid climate like I do, you may want to pair a mattifying primer and or setting spray with this foundation. Not so much in my opinion for longevity purposes, but to keep shine away longer during the day. After testing this for days and days, I've decided I don't dislike this foundation, but I don't love it either. It starts out strong, really pretty. It feels good all day. It doesn't feel heavy, and it ends strong in terms of coverage, but that finish gets lost for me during the day. That shine always comes out no matter what I do, which most times exaggerates pores, and texture. So if you have normal to dry skin, that may not be an issue for you. You may stay blurred and filtered, and I'm interested to see, those of you that have tried this, what you've experienced. I'm trying to decide right now if I want to go back to doing some individual foundation reviews like this one, or if I want to keep doing them roundup style. Let me know that in the comments too. I have tons of foundation reviews on this channel. If you want to check out more, they're here. If you enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you enjoy everyday beauty made easy, because that's what my channel is all about. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.